Hey everybody, I'm Don Henkle. On this edition of Shelter Life, it's a great pleasure to bring back one of the guests we had on our very first season, and that's Jace Huggins, who was then an animal control officer, but is now the chief animal control officer. So we're going to have a conversation with Jace about everything that's happened in the past 4 years, how things have changed for the animal care officers, what's happening in the field, what's happening with animal cases in Sacramento, and a lot more. So stick around and stay tuned. I'm Don Henkle. This is Shelter Life. Hey everybody, so sitting next to me is somebody who has definitely grown through the ranks with Front Street Animal Shelter. Jace, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, Don. Appreciate it.
A lot has changed in 4 years. I mean, Front Street as a whole has changed in 4 years. And I'm sure that animal control has also changed within that 4 years. I mean, if we go back to 4 years ago, you were an animal control officer. Mm-hmm. And I remember the interview very well because you were so passionate about it.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit what's transpired since that time for you specifically.
Gotcha. Well, my outfit has changed. I am the chief now. Actually, I believe shortly after I had become the senior animal control officer, and then when our chief had retired, I ended up getting the chief position. And some things are the same. The city of Sacramento has gained in population, so we have more calls, stuff like that kind of is expected. But I think the biggest thing that I've noticed changing is we are continuing to change the culture of our animal control team. I've always been very passionate about our community engagement and working with people who maybe don't have the same resources as everyone within the city of Sacramento. I think we talked about having food on our trucks for people who need it. And I think what I've seen the most and what I'm the most proud of is that by me being the chief now, we've been able to disseminate that culture throughout our animal control officers. So pretty much any animal control truck you see out in the city is going to have supplies for someone who needs them, willing to help out in any way, shape, or form. We've always been an amazing shelter who does a lot with a little, but I think we've slowly seen the progression with Gina's leadership, with Bobby Man, and then with me in the chief position of this continuous culture change of life-saving and life-helping, as Gina says, from the wet nose to the end of the leash, making sure we're taking care of the whole package when it comes to animal ownership in the city.
Well, I mean, you guys are a regional leader, and that's no secret, and I know you guys are really proud of that. So the team you currently have now, how many officers do you have?
We now have 9, and I believe when I was here last time we had 6 or 7.
Right.
Yeah.
So are you getting more support then from the city?
In some ways, we did get one position that was added. The other ones are filling of vacancies. So we have gotten to change some of our hiring process to make it a little bit easier to hire, because that was always a big challenge for us. And we've expanded our pool. I think sometimes in any job, when you're hiring, you have this tendency to get tunnel vision on exactly what it is you want. And I was actually one of the first animal control officers hired that didn't have prior animal control or some form of law enforcement or security.
Right.
I came from the veterinary background, and we've continued to open those doors and say, you don't have to have been in law enforcement to be a good animal control officer. You have to be passionate, you have to be compassionate, empathetic, and you have to want to do a job that's hard and come in every day and bring your best. Those are really the identifiers for a good animal control officer. Right. We can teach you the legal stuff. And so I think by really embracing that over the last 4 and 5 years as we've done hiring, we've been able to hire people that maybe people never even thought would be a great animal control officer, and they're amazing. And so I think it's been that kind of continued evolution that's really made a big difference for us.
And I think the current team that you've got a diverse team.
Yes.
I mean, it's a total mix.
Yeah.
And I think that should make you proud.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It makes me very proud. A really good example, our senior animal control officer, she worked in insurance. She had been a veterinary receptionist for a while. She was really passionate about animals. She had a criminal justice degree, but she came from insurance, and everybody was like, why are you hiring somebody from insurance? And I'm like, number one, if you can answer the phones for State Farm, like, I feel like you can deal with anybody. You know, and that really has shown. She came on as an entry-level animal control officer, and she's now one of our senior animal control officers. Her name's Callan Frisch, and she really epitomizes that concept of both ends of the leash. Right. And actually, I'll give you a perfect example. We actually just got cookies delivered the other day from a citizen whose pet had passed away. She had lost her son 3 weeks earlier, and she just kind of didn't know what to do, and Callan ended up out there with her, talking to her, and on Mother's Day she actually sent her flowers because it was going to be her first Mother's Day without her son. You know, wow. And that's something that you can't teach that. So we really focus on how do we find people that have that something. We can teach them all the other stuff. We can teach them how to be a good animal control officer. And I think that's really been the evolution of Front Street, is find the people with the heart and we'll teach them the rest.
It's a well-oiled machine, and obviously the additions you guys are making just make it an even better machine. Right. Yeah. So one of the things that we talked about a few years ago is the word dog catcher, which is not in your vocabulary.
Yes.
You know, and I think a lot of people still see the trucks go by, but you guys have really put a different spin to it. Can you elaborate a little bit how maybe even you as chief, or even when you were the chief officer, right, how you changed that perception?
A lot of it is, you know, I do my best to lead by example. I will almost always, like, if I introduce myself to somebody, I say, oh, I'm Jace. I happen to be the chief animal control officer, but I'm a person first, and I'm a person there to try and help deal with other people's issues. So a lot of it is really working more on making connection. It can be really easy to go from call to call to call, especially in a jurisdiction like the city that's so busy. We're always flooded with calls, and my mantra, and what you'll even hear my officers say, our officers say, you know, is that we do everything one call at a time. Right. Because at that moment, whatever we're dealing with, that's what's most important to us, and making sure that we are providing the level of service to the community and to the animals in the community. I think in our hiring and the variation in our hiring now, you kind of see that it's a subconscious or unconscious move towards molding away from that concept of a dog catcher. I joke around with people all the time. I really don't know the last time I chased and caught a dog, you know, even when I am in the field, because so much of our job nowadays is working within neighborhoods, trying to help neighbors settle disputes, and working on animal cruelty cases with the new task force, which I'm sure we'll touch on here soon.
We're going to touch on that for a minute.
Yeah, the types of calls are changing, and I think that's also kind of helps mold the new ACO, if you will. We're so much more than even the word control. Like Gina and I talk about, you know, animal protection officer, animal welfare officer, animal services officer. I try just to teach people not to focus so much on the title and focus more on the big picture of the job, because the reality is we're part-time social workers and psychologists. We're part-time animal, you know, finders and capturers, cat trappers. We are wildlife
you get
responders.
You get some interesting calls, don't you?
Yeah, so like that concept of animal control is a misnomer in a lot of ways. There's so much more to the job. I don't even know what the best all-encapsulating title would be.
I remember one of the ones that caught my eye, and this was a few years ago, was, remember the turtle? Yes. Did you guys have to go pick up that turtle?
The sulcata?
Yeah.
Yeah. We pick up all sorts of stuff. all sorts of stuff. We actually currently, shockingly enough, have a cruelty case involving a turtle. Elk Grove had one last year too. So yeah.
So before we get to that, because that's something that's really actually elevated in the past few years, and I do want to talk about that. Day in the life of an average animal control officer. Or is there an average day?
There's not an average day. If anybody watched the news last night, there was a double homicide in Sacramento off of Tranquility. We were there because there were animals in the house. So a lot of people don't realize that we have to respond to a large portion of police-related activity because there's animals involved, and we have to work with either finding family members or removing the animals.
I had no idea.
Yeah, yeah. Responding out to sick and injured animals, that's kind of the standard, but a lot of neighborhood, my neighbor's dog is always loose, to the point now where some of those calls have to be dealt with by letter on like first and second offenses because we just don't have the bandwidth to send an officer to every single one. Animal cruelty cases have increased substantially. Animal welfare cases, my neighbor's dog is outside in the pouring rain and there's no dog house. That's against the law, so we have to go out there and check it out. We do have a large section body of work related to the homeless community and trying to work with them. Yeah. Marijuana is now legal in the city of Sacramento. We have an uptick in kind of dealing with marijuana grows. When the police departments go in there to check on them, a lot of times they have guard dogs. So that's another portion of the work. There's not a normal day. There's just not.
If you guys get let's just say 20 calls, how do you prioritize that? I mean, how do you do that?
So public safety is always number one.
Okay.
So in a hypothetical, there's one officer in the city at the moment and someone's being chased by a dog and another animal just got hit by a car. We have to go to the one where the person is in danger.
Okay.
Public safety is always our number one priority. Animal welfare is a close second. We are very fortunate to have multiple units within the city that might be able to help us. So we may ask the police department if they have a unit in the area of one of those calls to go check it out. Or if the animal's at a park, we might ask the park rangers, hey, can you go check that out while our officer goes to this? And then we'll touch base and find out if we need to respond over there.
Has that collaboration always been there, or is that something that's been developed?
It's been developed. It's been one of my big pushes in being the chief is finding a way to work smart, work efficient, and effective. And part of that is networking and building relationships. The city of Sacramento is incredibly diverse. It's incredibly populated, 500,000 people. In 98 square miles. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we can't serve the community the best if we don't work together. So we actually have started teaching classes at the police department's continuing professional training about animal stuff. Yeah, and I'm going to be teaching at their new community service officer class. So we've been doing a lot of that type of outreach. We actually just did a tour with the downtown CHP officers and collaborated about how do we handle, unfortunately, a lot of people drive under the influence with animals in their car. So when they get taken to jail, how do we work out this response of getting the animal so CHP doesn't have to sit and wait for somebody to come from home, that kind of stuff. So we've really, really pushed that networking and collaboration. And, any phone call I make, I'm like, hey, I'll come to you, let's sit down, let's talk, and let's make a plan about how this works. And it really is helpful because our animal control officers have a whole list of numbers and tools in their tool belt now, and now they also do.
Okay.
PD will call me, 10, 11 o'clock at night, and they'll be like, hey, we're at this house, this is what we're seeing. I'm like, oh, we'll send an ACO tomorrow, or you know what, I'm going to get someone out to you right now. And having that support between the departments is, to me, it's integral to being able to provide the best services to the community and the animals in the community.
So is there an animal control officer on 24/7?
So we're not on 24/7. We start at 7 a.m. and we have 2 shifts, a day shift and then swing shift ends at 8 p.m. From 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. there is an animal control officer at home on call.
Got it.
So in the middle of the night there's usually some form of delay for a response time, but we do have somebody available.
Okay. So 2 topics we talked about, but we're going to dive in a little bit more. Mm-hmm. So animal cruelty cases, is horrible it is to say, are on the rise.
Yes.
And there's been a lot more success with prosecuting those.
Yes.
Can you just maybe give a little history if people don't understand what that means?
Yeah, so in my opinion, I don't know that there's necessarily more animal cruelty. I think we are identifying it faster and we are disseminating to the public, this is what's wrong and this is what you can do about it. But we have started the Sacramento Animal Cruelty Task Force, and that started 1.5 years ago now. Prior to the Animal Cruelty Task Force, animal control officers are peace officers to a point. So basically we have the powers of arrest, search, and seizure when we are on duty, but as soon as we go off duty, we have no status, and then we're also not considered sworn officers. So we didn't work as closely with the police department as we do now. And it was really hard to get cases through because animal control officers don't go through a huge academy. We have some pretty standard training of what's called PC 832, which is just a 2-week search and seizure class, and then a firearms class. Those are the only mandates by the state, is that 2.5 weeks of training. And it takes years to become an adept and fluid and versatile investigator when it comes to investigating crime. There's week and 2-week and 3-week long specialty classes that detectives go through in order to learn how to do that. So when animal crimes would happen, animal control officers often would do an initial response, gather information, but we either didn't have the skill set or we didn't have the support to get it pushed through to the next step to make it a good, solid case. And in this day and age, our communities and our society wants, the CSI effect. They want a good, solid case.
Right.
And so our cases were what we would call round filed. We would take them in, they would end up in somebody's desk drawer somewhere, and we would never hear about it again. We had a few really big cases that we were able to get pushed through, but not nearly the number of cases that actually were happening. So the district attorney's office, Anne Marie Schubert, and specifically Hillary Bagley, saw this void, saw this lack of support for not only to the city of Sacramento, but the county of Sacramento, Rancho Cordova, Citrus Heights, Elk Grove. We're all one big family when it comes down to it. So they kind of stepped back and said, you know what, we're going to create a team, a task force, and they're going to specialize just in these animal cruelty crimes. And the crimes themselves are horrendous, but really the motivating factor behind it is when you step back and you look at the science of the link between animal cruelty and other violent crimes, it's almost astounding. There's actually called a website called The Link, the National Coalition of Animal Cruelty, and they term it The Link. And it just runs through statistics. 43% of school shooters have histories of animal cruelty or abuse. I believe it's 44% of women don't leave abusive relationships because they're concerned that their abuser will take it out on the animals. 80% of households where physical child abuse has been reported or is currently under investigation also have reports of animal cruelty on them. So the link is absolutely there, and that's why the task force, being born and put together really makes a difference, because it's very rare that we prosecute an animal cruelty case and where that's really just it.
It's kind of like just the icing of the cake?
Yeah, the icing of the cake. The one we actually are more likely to sometimes find out about, because especially when it comes to domestic violence, abused women are more likely to take their animal to the hospital when it's injured than they are to take themselves to the hospital to get treatment. We just had one recently that finally pled out, Chavaria. He had 3 different domestic violence incidents in the time span of his animal cruelty case being worked on. And I could just sit here and list off a ton of names of different people just with horrendous animal cruelty crimes, but then to find out that there's also, loved ones in their life being beat, children in their life being abused. So we actually had one recent one that we went on, and they actually had the fridge and the freezer were padlocked so that the kids couldn't get into the fridge and freezer. And that's the kind of stuff that animal control officers do that nobody ever thinks about. They never contemplate.
Yeah.
Like we have, there's an ongoing case, child endangerment case right now that was completely initiated by our animal control officers because they were on scene for a dog that was tethered and were quickly able to identify that there was some major things going on in the house, and that's getting ready to go to trial. Wow. So
that collaboration that you have with the other agencies is probably a really catapulting aspect.
Yeah.
There's a thing called hoarding cases, right?
Yes.
Hoarding issues is when obviously a family or home, maybe at a ranch, have probably a lot of animals and maybe the intention is good, but the results aren't so good.
Yeah.
We've had some of those in our area, right?
Yeah.
Can you maybe speak to a couple of those?
Yeah, sure. I'm actually going to touch on one that's not ours, but it's the one that's probably fresh in most people's mind. The county of El Dorado just had a huge one where they ended up having over 300 Boston Terriers in
300?
300. Yeah. in a house and then trailer, and I believe they're still working on that. We had ended up responding out and helping them a little bit with some of our staff. A similar type thing, people who believe that they are doing what's best for the animals, running a rescue or what have you, and it gets out of control. Most recently for us, we had one where we removed 34 cats out of a house. Not a huge number of cats, however, part of what kind of defines the concept of hoarding is the inability to clean up after them. And in that particular instance, it's actually the one where I sent you the picture. It was on my birthday. Very memorable for me.
Like this big old gas mask. On.
And that's because the smell of the ammonia in those houses can be so overwhelming and bad.
Do people that live in that don't smell it?
They don't notice it. A lot of times, health problems. Unfortunately, in this particular house, the owner had passed away. Family members were concerned; they hadn't heard from her, and there is actually a legitimate possibility that the conditions of the house led to her health and disability problems.
Wow.
Yeah, so we get them more often than not. For us, it's been cats, but we hear about them. You know, animal control officers, we're kind of a small network, and so in the area, people tell us. I heard about one that was possums and chickens. They just had a house full of possums and chickens.
That's amazing.
And it's usually a mental health. There's a connection to the animal. It's very similar to the mentality of object hoarding, except it's with living creatures. And when you have living creatures, you know, a stack of newspaper doesn't have to have a litter box cleaned up after and food put out for it and whatnot. So when you have these animals, it's usually the care that falls to the wayside, not necessarily the love per se. It's just somebody's physical ability to provide that much care for that many animals. And then you just see it spiral out of control where they can't ever catch up.
So how do you guys find out? I mean, does somebody, like a family member, like in this one probably called and said we're concerned, but when you get the phone call and say, maybe it's the police responding, and they say, Jace, we just responded to this house and you need to come.
Right.
I mean, do you like all suit up? And I mean,
we usually go out and check it out first, because what we've also learned is that what's kind of overwhelming to some people, we're like, nah, we'll go in there. You know, that's not going to be an issue. But this one, we definitely had to suit up. I think we did booties and masks. But there was one downtown a few years ago that we ended up having to do full Tyvek suits.
I think I remember that.
Yeah. It was a pretty, not a ton of cats, but the cats weren't cared for. And that's why it's like, you can't ever quantitate. It's not like 20 cats becomes a hoarder. You know, you can technically have 12 to 15 cats, but it becomes a hoarding-like situation because they're unable to clean up after them and take care of them.
The disease you guys come across in situations like that, I mean, I know that the vet team responds as well, and they can basically quickly analyze whether a cat or a dog is going to be able to be saved or if they're beyond the point. How do you guys shut that off emotionally?
You know, the reality is that, well, nobody wants. It's not so much a shut off. It's a ability to step back and say that sometimes the best thing you can do for an animal is to not allow it to continue suffering. You know, and it's really important that that compassionate part of you is able to see that. I don't think anybody can do this job that is like anti-euthanasia. I think that would be incredibly hard. You wouldn't be able to shut that off.
Right.
But the reality is that some of these animals that we deal with, whether it be behavioral, whether it be medical, they have suffered, and allowing that continue isn't fair to them.
Right.
And as an animal shelter and as animal control officers, we have the ability to not make them sit in a small metal box for the rest of their life or small plastic box for the rest of their life.
Before we run out of time, I want to talk about the homeless population and their animals. Like Gina says, even homeless people deserve to have an animal, right?
Yes.
That's their family, and I agree with that. But how are we dealing with maybe the homeless animals that aren't really being taken care of or are being more aggressive? Are you guys involved in working with the city and trying to monitor those situations? And I say this only from personal experience because I'm seeing it like 2 blocks from where I live.
Right.
And I'm just like, you guys, there are free clinics for shots.
Yeah.
This animal obviously needs help.
Yeah.
And I mean, as a citizen at that point in time, should I just let it go, or should I contact somebody?
So it depends on the level. An animal not getting vaccines but being fed and kept out of inclement weather and not tied up 24/7, we're not going to be able to do much about. We could write no rabies vaccine tickets until our face was blue, but it doesn't solve the problem.
Right.
What we try and do, and the rabies vaccine is kind of the most important for me because of rabies control in general and bite reports. And we can't just give rabies vaccines out in the field. We have to have a veterinarian with us by law. So that one's a little harder. We have the free clinics. We do refer them out to a couple of the mobile vets. And the Sacramento Police Department actually has the impact team who primarily works with the homeless community. And they have a schedule where they have a veterinarian go out with them. So we can contact, again, going back to the networking with the other departments,
right.
We a lot of times will contact the impact team, say, hey, we met up with Mr. Smith over at X and Y, blah, blah, blah. The next time you have the impact veterinarian out with you, can you all try and go pay him a visit? It looks like his dog probably needs vaccines and some wormer and stuff. However, when it comes to animal cruelty, a person's financial, cultural, anything status plays no part in that. It is all about what is happening with the animal and are they breaking a law, and is that animal's health and safety in danger? If so, we will remove it. We really, sounds rude, but we really don't care who you are. Right. If you're not following the laws and taking care of an animal,
Correct.
We're going to remove it from you. So we have had some prosecutions. The most recent one was Johnny Wells, who was seen pretty violently beating his dog. And for me, part of the important reason to pursue even the headline screaming crimes is because in the state of California, there's a prohibition that comes along with an animal cruelty sentencing. So if you get found guilty of or plead guilty to a misdemeanor, you are not allowed to own an animal for 5 years. You're not allowed to live with one, be a caretaker for, pet sit, go visit an animal. And if you are found with an animal in your general area, you're considered having violated your probation. If you're found guilty of a felony, it's a 10-year.
Wow.
So for me, sometimes there are times where we present a case to the district attorney's office, and I will tell them, all I want is a prohibition. Tell me that this person can't own an animal. I don't care if you put them in jail. If you can get counseling, that would be awesome, but tell me they can't own an animal for the next 5 to 10 years.
Wow.
That will make me happy that we can violate their probation if we find them with one.
So you've got so much information.
Yeah.
And we're out of time. and it's just like, I want to keep asking. Because,
right.
I want to know more about the hoarding cases. I want to know more about what citizens of Sacramento can do to maybe assist or help the homeless with their pets. I mean, I know they've opened up the shelters and the pets are allowed to go into those now.
Yep.
Which is great. And I know Front Street was vital in that rollout, and that's great. And there's just so many more things happening. But, Jace, it's great to see how you've grown.
Thank you.
It's great to see what you're doing with the department, and it's inspiring. That's why we wanted to have you back on the show, because I'm like, they've done so much and people need to know about this, because you're kind of like the quiet ones in the background, you know? When we're having Positive Party and Brewfest, you don't hear a whole about what the ACOs and everybody's doing.
Because we're out on the streets.
Yeah, you're doing, you're protecting the animals. So, thank you for that.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And I'm so glad you came on the show again.
Yeah. If you want to talk more, just let me know.
Yeah, it's been great to catch up, and we may take you up on that.
No problem.
We may take you up on that.
We could do a whole show about wildlife alone.
Yeah, I bet. Especially the birds and turtles and reptiles. Never mind, I don't like the reptiles. I'll pass on that. So everybody, it was great to have Jace Huggins on tonight, representing the animal control officers, being the chief for good old Front Street and the city of Sacramento. So congratulations on that well-deserved promotion. Until next time, I'm Don Henkle, and we will see you right back here on Shelter Life.